At 2:17 a.m. on September 23, 1944, Staff Sergeant James Thompson sat in the commander's hatch of his M4 Sherman tank, staring at a device that shouldn't exist. A shaving mirror glued to cardboard, a magnetized sewing needle balanced on a pencil eraser, string and tape holding it together. His hands shook as he held it, not from cold, from the knowledge that 12 tanks and 63 men were about to trust this homemade contraption with their lives. The official lensatic compass had died 20 minutes earlier. So had every other compass in the column. They were deep inside the Hurtgen Forest, eastern Belgium, German territory. The trees formed a canopy so thick that moonlight couldn't penetrate. No stars, no landmarks, just darkness and the low rumble of diesel engines that could draw enemy patrols from miles away. Behind Thompson, 11 other Shermans sat idling on a logging road that had ended at a bombed bridge. 4th Armored Division, detached for a reconnaissance mission that had gone wrong 3 hours ago. Captain Morrison had ordered radio silence after they crossed German lines. Smart decision. German direction finders could pinpoint a radio transmission in under 2 minutes. But it meant no one was coming to help. The original plan was simple. Push through a gap in German defenses, scout enemy positions near Aachen, return before dawn. The gap was real. The intelligence about German strength was not. They'd driven straight into the rear area of the 5th Panzer Army. Thompson had watched through his periscope as German supply trucks passed within 50 yards, headlights on, completely unaware that 12 American tanks were hiding in the tree line. Morrison's voice crackled over the intercom. 15 words that changed everything. The bridge is gone. All compasses are dead. We need another way out. Now. Thompson looked at his homemade compass again. The needle was trembling, pointing in a direction that felt wrong. North, maybe. Or northeast. Hard to tell with hands shaking and adrenaline making his vision tunnel. He'd built this thing 2 weeks ago as a joke. Used a sewing needle from his repair kit, rubbed it against the magnet he'd salvaged from a broken radio. Floated it in a tin cup of water at first, but that spilled every time the tank moved. So he'd tried balancing it on a pencil eraser instead. The mirror was for checking the angle without bending down. Stupid. Crude. Something a kid would make for a school project. The tank crew had laughed when they saw it. Even Morrison had smiled. But Thompson kept it anyway, taped inside his map case, because the official compass was heavy, and sometimes he wanted something lighter for quick checks. Now that official compass was spinning uselessly, some kind of magnetic anomaly in this part of the forest. Iron ore deposits in the rocks maybe, or leftover shrapnel from artillery strikes. Didn't matter why. What mattered was that dawn would arrive in 3 hours and 40 minutes. When the sun came up, German patrols would spot them. 12 Shermans couldn't fight the entire 5th Panzer Army. They had to move. But move where? Thompson did the math. If they went the wrong direction, they'd drive deeper into German territory. Fuel would run out. They'd be surrounded, captured or killed. All 63 men. If they stayed here, same result, just slower. The only option was to trust a compass made from trash. Morrison climbed onto Thompson's tank. His face was gray in the darkness. He looked at the homemade compass and his expression didn't change. "How sure are you?" Thompson wanted to lie, wanted to sound confident. But this was Morrison, a captain who'd pulled Thompson out of a burning half-track near St. Lo, who'd told him the truth when Thompson's brother died at Omaha Beach. A man who deserved honesty. 60%, Thompson said. Morrison was quiet for 5 seconds. Then he nodded. "That's better odds than staying here. Lead the way." What happened next wasn't in any training manual. Before we continue, if you're finding this story compelling, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps us share more untold histories like this one. Now, let's continue with Thompson's mission. The problem with tank navigation in World War II wasn't new. It had killed men since 1942. American tank commanders received exactly 4 hours of compass training before deployment. Read the dial, find north, follow the heading. Simple in theory, deadly in practice. A standard M4 Sherman tank carried 3 navigation tools: the primary lensatic compass mounted on the commander station, a backup compass in the driver's compartment, and paper maps that showed roads, rivers, and elevation contours, but rarely included the kind of detail that mattered in combat, like which forests had magnetic anomalies, or which valleys filled with fog so thick you couldn't see your own hand. Night operations were supposed to be rare. Tank doctrine from Fort Knox emphasized daylight advances, with infantry support and air cover. But by September 1944, doctrine had collided with reality. The German army was retreating, but fighting hard. They moved at night to avoid Allied aircraft, so American commanders started setting tanks out after dark to catch them. Reconnaissance missions, raids on supply columns, quick strikes that required moving fast through unknown territory without lights. The results were catastrophic. Between June and September 1944, the 4th Armored Division lost 23 tanks to navigation errors at night. Not combat losses, navigation losses. Tanks that drove into rivers because the driver couldn't see the bank. Tanks that got separated from their columns and wandered into German positions. Tanks that ran out of fuel trying to find their way back to friendly lines. The worst incident happened on August 19th. A platoon of 5 Shermans was sent to scout German positions near Chartres, France. They left at 10 p.m. By midnight, they were lost. The lead tank's compass had failed. The others followed anyway because staying together seemed safer than splitting up. They drove in circles for 3 hours, burning fuel, making noise. At 3:15 a.m., they stumbled into a German supply depot. 40 Wehrmacht soldiers with Panzerfausts. All 5 tanks were destroyed. 19 crew members killed, 2 captured. After that, Division Command issued new orders. All night operations required backup navigation, star charts, terrain recognition, radio check-ins every 30 minutes. But those solutions had problems. Star charts were useless when cloud cover blocked the sky. Terrain recognition required landmarks you could actually see in the dark, and radio check-ins gave away your position to German listening posts. The compass problem in the Hurtgen forest was different. Worse. The forest sat on top of iron ore deposits that had been disturbed by years of artillery bombardment, unexploded shells buried in the soil, shrapnel scattered across every hillside, tank wrecks from earlier battles rusting in ravines. All that metal created magnetic interference that made compasses spin like tops. German forces knew about the anomaly. They'd been operating in the Hurtgen since 1943 and had learned to navigate by landmarks and dead reckoning. American units were just arriving. They had no experience with magnetic dead zones, no training for what to do when every compass in the column stopped working simultaneously. Thompson's column had driven into the anomaly at 11:47 p.m. At first, the compasses just wobbled, needles swinging 10 or 15 degrees off true north. Annoying, but manageable. Then, as they pushed deeper into the forest, the needles started spinning. Full rotations, clockwise, counterclockwise, no pattern. By midnight, every compass was useless. Morrison had tried everything. He'd sent his driver to check landmarks, but the darkness was total, and the logging road looked identical in every direction. He'd tried dead reckoning, calculating distance and direction from the last known position, but they'd made too many turns avoiding obstacles. The math didn't work anymore. He'd even considered waiting for dawn, but dawn meant German patrols, and German patrols meant 63 American soldiers surrounded by an entire panzer army. That's when Thompson had pulled out his homemade compass, the one his crew called the toy, the one made from a mirror, a needle, and hope. What no one understood yet was why it still worked when the others had failed. Thompson's problem wasn't just broken compasses. It was 12 tanks trying to move silently through enemy territory while German forces controlled every road, every intersection, every bridge within 20 miles. The 4th Armored Division had trained for breakthroughs and pursuit. Fast advances across open ground with air support and artillery. Not slow navigation through forests at night with no communication and no backup plan. The standard procedure for lost tank columns was simple on paper. Stop, establish a defensive perimeter, wait for dawn, call for help. But that procedure assumed you had time. Thompson's column had 3 hours and 22 minutes until sunrise, maybe less if German patrols were already searching for them. Morrison had considered fighting their way out. 12 Shermans could punch through light resistance, but intelligence reports said the 5th Panzer Army had over 200 tanks in this sector. Panthers, Tigers, Panzer IVs, all with better armor and bigger guns than the Sherman. A straight fight would be suicide. The only advantage American tanks had was mobility, and you couldn't be mobile if you didn't know which direction to go. The crew in Thompson's tank was starting to fracture. Private Webb, the driver, had been sitting in his compartment for 43 minutes with the engine idling, breathing diesel fumes, watching his fuel gauge drop. He'd asked twice over the intercom when they were moving. The second time, his voice had an edge that Thompson recognized, fear turning into panic. Corporal Diaz, the gunner, was quieter, but Thompson could hear him shifting in his seat, the metallic click of the turret traverse being tested, again and again. Nervous energy with nowhere to go. In combat, Diaz was steady, could put a 75mm shell through a moving target at 800 yards. But waiting in the dark with no mission and no plan was different. It gave men time to think about all the ways they could die. The worst part was the noise discipline. Morrison had ordered no unnecessary sound, no talking, no unnecessary movement. Smart for avoiding detection. Terrible for morale. Silence, let fear grow. Let imagination fill in gaps. Thompson could feel it in his own chest. The tightness that came from knowing you were trapped and trying not to show it. Other tanks in the column were having worse problems. Lieutenant Parker's Sherman had a crew member who'd started hyperventilating 20 minutes ago. Thompson had heard it over the radio before Morrison ordered silence. Fast, shallow breaths, someone saying, it's okay, but not believing it. That tank was combat ineffective now, even if the shooting started. You couldn't fight when your loader was having a panic attack. The fuel situation was getting critical. Sherman tanks carried enough diesel for roughly 100 miles of road travel, but forest navigation at night burned fuel faster. Constant stops and starts, low gear crawling over obstacles, idling while the commander tried to figure out which way to go. Thompson's fuel gauge showed 3/4 of a tank. That sounded good until you did the math. If they went the wrong direction and had to backtrack, they'd run dry before reaching friendly lines. Temperature was dropping. September nights in the Hurtgen forest got down to 40 degrees, cold enough that men started shivering if they stayed still too long, cold enough that diesel fuel thickened and engines ran rough. Thompson's hands were numb. He'd been holding the homemade compass for so long that his fingers had cramped around it. Morrison climbed back onto Thompson's tank at 2:34 a.m. He had a map and a flashlight with a red filter. The light was dim enough that it wouldn't be visible beyond 50 yards. Probably. He spread the map across the turret and pointed to their last known position. A pencil mark on a road that wasn't there anymore.
If your compass is accurate, Morrison said, and if we're actually here, and if there's a logging road heading northwest about 2 miles from this position, we might have a route out. 3 ifs. Thompson counted them. 3 assumptions stacked on top of each other. Any one of them wrong meant they'd drive straight into German positions, or off a cliff, or into a river they couldn't cross. What made this crisis worse was the sound they heard at 2:37 a.m. Diesel engines. Not American. The sound was wrong. Higher pitched. Tighter mechanical rhythm. German trucks or half-tracks somewhere to the east. Maybe a mile away. Maybe less. Sound traveled strangely in dense forest. Could be closer than it seemed. Morrison's hand went up. Silent signal. Everyone freeze. The idling Sherman engines were suddenly too loud. 12 diesel motors putting out enough noise to be for miles if you knew what to listen for. And German patrols definitely knew what Sherman engines sounded like. Thompson held his breath, counted seconds. The German vehicles were moving parallel to their position. Not toward them. Not yet. But if the column stayed here much longer, the Germans would close the distance. Or a patrol would stumble onto them by accident. 12 Shermans couldn't hide forever. Morrison looked at Thompson. The captain's face said everything without words. We're out of time. We move now or we don't move at all. The decision had been made. Thompson's homemade compass was their only option. 60% chance of being right, 40% chance of leading everyone into disaster. Thompson checked the compass again. The needle was steady now, pointing northwest. That direction felt wrong based on instinct. Thompson's gut said they should go west, due west, shortest route back to American lines. But the needle disagreed, and Thompson had to choose between gut feeling and a device made from a mirror and a magnetized needle. He chose the needle. Morrison gave hand signals to the other tank commanders. They'd use a column formation. Thompson's Sherman in the lead, the others following at 20-yard intervals. No lights, no radio. If Thompson's tank stopped, everyone stopped. If it turned, everyone turned. Simple. Terrifying. 63 men trusting one sergeant's trash compass. Thompson climbed down into his position and keyed the intercom. Webb, we're moving. Northwest heading. Stay 15 yards behind me. I'll guide you by hand signals. Webb's voice came back thin and tight. How do you know it's northwest? Because the compass says so, Thompson replied. There was a pause. Then Webb said something that would stick with Thompson for the rest of his life. Sarge, if we die because of that thing, I'm gonna haunt you. Thompson almost laughed. Would have if the situation weren't so desperate. Get ready to move. At 2:41 a.m., Thompson's Sherman lurched forward. The treads bit into soft forest soil. The engine noise seemed impossibly loud now that they were moving. Thompson stood in the commander's hatch with the homemade compass in his left hand and a flashlight in his right. He couldn't use the flashlight often. Every time he clicked it on, even with the red filter, it felt like broadcasting their position to every German soldier in the forest. The first 30 yards were straight, easy. Then the ground started rising and Thompson had to adjust. 5 degrees left to avoid a fallen tree. 10 degrees right to stay clear of a crater that looked like it might be an old artillery impact. Each turn made his heart pound harder because each turn meant deviation from the heading, and deviation meant the margin for error was shrinking. Behind him, 11 Shermans followed in the darkness. Thompson couldn't see them, could only hear the low rumble of engines and the occasional crunch of treads over branches. He imagined Morrison in the second tank, watching Thompson's silhouette, trusting that this was the right direction. He imagined the other crews, men who'd fought beside him since Normandy, who'd pulled him out of tight spots and trusted him to do the same. All of them following a compass that shouldn't work. Thompson checked the needle again at 2:49 a.m., still pointing northwest, still steady. He made a small adjustment, brought the column 3 degrees right to match the heading exactly. His hands weren't shaking anymore. The fear had crystallized into focus. This was the mission now. Navigate. Keep the heading true. Get everyone home. At 2:53 a.m., they hit the first obstacle. A stream cutting across their path, not marked on the map, maybe 15 feet wide. The banks were steep. Webb stopped the tank and Thompson heard Morrison's voice whisper over the radio net that wasn't supposed to be active. Can we cross it? Thompson climbed down, tested the depth with a stick. 3 feet. Shallow enough. The bottom was mud but firm enough for treads. He signaled yes and climbed back up. The Sherman splashed into the water. The engine noise changed pitch as the tracks fought for grip. For 5 seconds, Thompson thought they'd get stuck. Then the tank surged up the far bank and kept moving. Behind them, 11 more tanks crossed the same stream, one by one. No one got stuck. No one fell in. Thompson didn't let himself feel relief yet. They'd only been moving for 12 minutes. They had miles to go. But it worked.
The reason Thompson's homemade compass worked when the official ones failed came down to 3 things: weight, materials, and an accident of design that no engineer at Fort Knox had considered. Standard military Lensatic compasses weighed 11 ounces. The housing was brass, the bezel was steel. The mounting bracket that attached it to the tank commander's station was iron. precision instruments designed to be durable and accurate under normal conditions. But all that metal created a problem. When magnetic interference hit, the metal components acted like amplifiers. They caught the distorted magnetic field and magnified it, made the confusion worse. Thomson's compass had almost no metal. The needle was steel, yes, but it was a sewing needle. Thin, light, less than 1/10 of an ounce. The rest was cardboard, mirror glass, pencil eraser, and string. No brass housing, no iron bracket. Nothing to amplify the magnetic interference. The needle could still sense Earth's magnetic field, even when the anomaly was distorting it, because there wasn't enough metal around it to create feedback. The second advantage was friction. Military compasses used a jeweled bearing to let the needle rotate smoothly. High precision, low friction. Good for normal use, but in the Hurtgen forest, that low friction became a liability. The needle in a military compass could spin freely on its bearing. When magnetic interference hit, the needle would rotate wildly because nothing was damping the motion. It would spin and spin, searching for north but never settling. Thomson's needle sat on a pencil eraser. The rubber created friction. Not a lot, but enough. When the needle tried to spin from magnetic interference, the rubber slowed it down, damped the motion. The needle would twitch and wobble, but it wouldn't go into the wild rotations that made the military compasses useless. It found north slowly, uncertainly, but it found it. The magnetization was the third piece. Thomson had made the needle magnetic by rubbing it against a salvaged radio magnet 50 times in one direction, a technique he'd learned as a kid. The magnetization wasn't as strong as a factory compass needle. It was weaker, much weaker. But that weakness was actually an advantage in the magnetic anomaly. A strongly magnetized needle would react violently to interference. A weakly magnetized needle would react gently. Thomson's needle was just magnetic enough to sense north, without being so magnetic that the interference overwhelmed it. The mirror served a practical purpose that had nothing to do with navigation. In the commander's hatch, Thomson couldn't look straight down at the compass without taking his eyes off the terrain ahead. The mirror let him glance down and see the needle's reflection while keeping his head up. It saved seconds. And in a 12-tank column moving through enemy territory at night, seconds mattered. Thomson hadn't understood any of this when he built the compass. He'd done it as a joke, something to pass time during a boring afternoon at a supply depot near Chartres. He'd shown it to Webb and Diaz and they'd laughed. Even Thomson had laughed. It looked ridiculous, a child's science project taped to cardboard. But now, at 3:07 a.m. on September 23rd, that ridiculous device was keeping them alive. Thomson checked it every 2 minutes. The needle stayed steady, northwest. Always northwest. Even when they had to detour around obstacles, he'd bring the column back to that heading. Trusted it because he had no other choice. The column had covered roughly 2 miles, maybe less. Hard to judge distance in the dark when every 100 yards took 5 minutes of careful navigation. They'd crossed 3 more streams, skirted 2 clearings where moonlight broke through the canopy, avoided one area where Thomson heard voices, German voices, close enough that he could make out words, orders being given. Someone complaining about the cold. Morrison had halted the column at that point, waited in silence for 10 minutes while the German patrol moved away. Thomson's heart had hammered so hard he thought the Germans would hear it, but they didn't. The patrol passed within 100 yards and never knew 12 American tanks were sitting in the darkness. At 3:21 a.m., Webb's voice came over the intercom, quiet, tense. "Sarge, fuel gauge is at half. How much farther?" Thomson didn't know. The map showed friendly lines roughly 8 miles from their starting position. They'd covered maybe 3 miles. Maybe. That left 5 miles to go, and they were burning fuel faster than planned because of all the detours and slow navigation. He didn't tell Webb any of that, just said, "Keep going." At 3:28 a.m., the compass needle did something it hadn't done since they started moving. It wavered. The needle that had been steady for 47 minutes started oscillating. 5 degrees left, 5 degrees right. Back and forth like it couldn't decide where north was anymore. Thomson felt his stomach drop. He tapped the compass gently. The needle kept wavering. He held it perfectly still. No change. Morrison's voice came over the radio. Thompson, why are we stopping? Thompson didn't answer right away. He was watching the needle, trying to understand what was happening. They were either entering a worse magnetic anomaly or leaving the one they'd been in. Either way, the compass was losing reliability at the worst possible time. He keyed the radio. Compass is acting strange. Give me 2 minutes. 2 minutes felt like 20. Thompson pulled out the map and tried to calculate their position. If they'd been traveling northwest at roughly 2 miles per hour for 47 minutes, they should be about 1.5 miles from the starting position. But that assumed straight-line travel. They'd made dozens of turns, detours, adjustments. The real distance could be 1 mile. Could be 2. No way to know for certain. The needle stopped wavering at 3:31 a.m. It settled on a new heading. North. Due north. Not northwest anymore. Thompson stared at it. Either the magnetic interference had shifted, or they'd moved into a different zone. Or the compass was failing. He had no way to tell which. Morrison climbed onto Thompson's tank. He looked at the compass. Looked at Thompson. What's happening? I don't know, Thompson said. The heading changed. Could mean we're out of the anomaly. Could mean we're in a worse one. Could mean this thing is breaking. Morrison studied the terrain ahead. The forest was thinning slightly. Not much, but enough that occasional patches of moonlight reached the ground. He pointed to a ridge about 300 yards north. If we go to that ridge, we can see farther. Might spot landmarks. Might figure out where we are. Thompson nodded. It was a gamble. Ridges were exposed. Good for observation. Also good for getting spotted. But staying here with a failing compass was worse. He signaled the column to move. The climb to the ridge took 11 minutes. The slope was gentle, but the ground was loose, shale and mud. The Shermans had to gun their engines to maintain traction. Noise discipline went out the window. Anyone within a mile would hear them now. Thompson counted the seconds, waited for the sound of German tanks starting up, for the crack of an 88mm gun. Nothing. Just the roar of diesel engines and the grinding of treads on rock. They reached the ridge at 3:46 a.m. Thompson climbed out of his hatch and looked northwest. What he saw made his breath catch. Lights. Dozens of them. A German encampment about 2 miles away. Tents, vehicles, campfires. The entire 5th Panzer Army staging area, spread across a valley like a small city. If they'd kept going northwest, they would have driven straight into it. Morrison saw it too. His face went white in the moonlight. The compass saved us. No, Thompson said. The compass broke, and that saved us. If it had stayed accurate, we'd be dead. It was the kind of luck that made men religious. The kind of coincidence that felt like divine intervention. Thompson didn't believe in that. But he also couldn't explain why the compass had failed at exactly the moment it needed to. Why the needle had shifted from northwest to north just before they would have crested a hill that led straight into enemy positions. Morrison pulled out his map. Used the German encampment as a reference point. If that's the staging area, and we're here, then friendly lines are northeast, not northwest. The original heading was wrong. Thompson felt sick. They'd been going the wrong direction the entire time. The 60% confidence he'd given Morrison was meaningless. The compass had been lying from the start. They should have driven straight into the German camp and died. But they hadn't. Because the compass broke. Because magnetic interference had shifted. Because of dumb luck. Morrison replotted their route. Northeast to a road junction. Then east along a supply road that intelligence said was clear. Then south to American positions near Aachen. Roughly 6 miles. Fuel was at half tanks. It would be close. He looked at Thompson. Can that compass give us northeast? Thompson checked the needle. It was pointing north. Steady now. No wavering. He could estimate northeast by splitting the difference between north and east. Rough navigation. Imprecise. But better than nothing.
"Yeah," Thompson said. "I can do northeast." They moved out at 3:53 a.m. The column descended the ridge on the far side, away from the German encampment, into a valley that the map showed as empty. Thompson watched his compass constantly now, didn't trust it, couldn't ignore it. The needle stayed north. He adjusted the column's heading 5 degrees right, then 5 more, estimating northeast by feel and hope. At 4:07 a.m. they hit the road junction. It was exactly where the map said it would be. Thompson felt a surge of relief so strong it made him dizzy. They were on track. They had a chance. Then they heard the sound that every tank commander dreaded. Tracks. Tank tracks on hard-packed road, metal on gravel, the distinctive clanking rhythm of German tanks, not trucks, not half-tracks. Panzers. Coming from the east along the supply road that Morrison had just told them to take. Morrison's hand shot up. Stop. Silent signal passed down the column. 12 Shermans froze at the road junction, engines idling, crews listening. The German tanks were close, maybe half a mile, maybe less. Sound carried differently on open roads than in forest, hard to judge distance. Thompson counted the vehicles by ear, a skill he'd developed over 4 months of combat. Each tank had a unique sound signature. The Panther's Maybach engine had a deeper growl than the Sherman's diesel. The Tiger's transmission made a distinctive whine. He counted 3 distinct engine notes. 3 German tanks. Could be more behind them, but at least 3 in the lead element. The tactical situation was simple and terrible. The American column needed to cross this road to reach friendly lines, but German tanks were using the same road. If Thompson's column tried to cross now, they'd drive straight into a meeting engagement at point-blank range. 3 German tanks against 12 American Shermans sounded like good odds until you factored in surprise and position. The Germans would see them first, would shoot first, would kill the lead tanks before the column could react. Morrison made a decision in under 10 seconds. He signaled Thompson, "We wait, let them pass, then we cross." Thompson nodded. It was the right call, the only call, but it meant sitting still while German tanks rolled past within a few hundred yards, meant hoping they didn't spot 12 Shermans in the tree line, meant trusting that darkness and luck would keep them hidden. The German tanks reached the junction at 4:12 a.m. Thompson watched through his periscope. 3 Panthers, massive things with sloped armor and long 75mm guns that could punch through a Sherman's front plate at 1,000 yards. They were moving fast, 40 kilometers per hour, headlights on, completely confident. No idea that American tanks were watching from the shadows. The lead Panther passed within 200 yards of Thompson's position, so close he could see the commander standing in the turret hatch, a German officer scanning the road ahead with binoculars, not looking left or right. Why would he? This was German-controlled territory. The supply road was supposed to be safe. Thompson held his breath. Beside him, Webb was frozen at the driver's controls. Diaz had his hand on the turret traverse but wasn't moving. Everyone in the crew understood that one sound, one movement, one mistake would bring 3 Panther guns around, and at 200 yards, the Shermans wouldn't survive the first salvo. The second Panther passed, then the third. They kept going west without slowing down. The sound of their engines faded into the distance. Morrison waited 2 full minutes after the last Panther disappeared. Then he signaled the column to move. Thompson's Sherman rolled onto the supply road at 4:17 a.m. The surface was gravel and packed dirt, smooth compared to forest terrain. Webb pushed the tank up to 20 kilometers per hour, faster than they'd moved all night. The other 11 Shermans followed, crossing the junction, getting onto the road, forming a column that stretched 300 yards. They traveled east for 12 minutes. The road was straight and relatively flat. Thompson kept checking his compass even though they were following a road now. The needle pointed north. The road ran east. Simple navigation. No decisions to make. Just follow the road and hope it led where the map said it led. At 4:29 a.m., they reached a fork. The map showed the left fork going to Aachen,
the right fork going to a German supply depot. Thompson signaled left, and the column turned. The road started climbing. A long, gradual slope up a hillside. The Sherman's engine labored. Fuel gauge was below 1/4 now. They were running on fumes and hope. Dawn was coming. The sky to the east was turning from black to dark gray. In 30 minutes, maybe 40, there would be enough light for German observers to spot them from miles away. Morrison radioed the column. "Increase speed. We need to reach American lines before full daylight." Webb pushed the throttle forward. The Sherman accelerated to 30 kilometers per hour. Dangerous speed for a tank on an unfamiliar road, but Morrison was right. Speed was their only defense now. Get to friendly lines before the sun came up, before German patrol spotted them, before fuel ran out. At 4:43 a.m., Thompson saw something that made his chest tighten. A roadblock ahead. Logs across the road, barbed wire, sandbag positions on both sides. He couldn't tell if it was American or German. The light was too dim. The positions were unmanned as far as he could see, but that could mean anything. Morrison's voice came over the radio. One word that carried more weight than any order Thompson had ever heard. Pray. The roadblock was American. Third Army positions outside Aachen. The sandbagged emplacements were unmanned because the unit had pulled back during the night to avoid German artillery. Thompson's column rolled through at 4:47 a.m. on September 23, 1944. 12 M4 Sherman tanks, 63 men, 0 casualties. They reached the American supply depot at 5:03 a.m., 17 minutes before sunrise. The fuel gauges read empty. Webb shut down the engine, and it didn't restart when they tried it 30 minutes later. They'd burned every drop getting home. Morrison filed his after-action report that same afternoon. The report mentioned magnetic compass failure, mentioned Thompson's improvised navigation device, mentioned the near miss with the German encampment and the Panther Patrol. 4th Armored Division Command read the report, noted it, filed it, did nothing. No orders went out about backup navigation methods. No one suggested that tank crews should carry homemade compasses. The official response was that Thompson had gotten lucky, that magnetic anomalies in the Hurtgen Forest were a known issue, that proper planning and daylight operations would prevent similar situations in the future. Thompson kept his compass, taped it back inside his map case, never needed it again. The 4th Armored Division didn't return to the Hurtgen Forest. They pushed east into Germany through areas where the magnetic interference was less severe. Standard compasses worked fine. Thompson's improvised device became a curiosity, something his crew mentioned in letters home, but never used in combat again. The Battle of Hurtgen Forest continued until December 1944. American casualties exceeded 33,000 men. Navigation problems killed or wounded hundreds of soldiers who got lost in the forest and stumbled into German positions. But those deaths were attributed to difficult terrain and poor visibility, not compass failure. The official lessons learned from Hurtgen focused on infantry tactics and artillery coordination. Navigation received one paragraph in a 50-page report. Thompson survived the war. He was promoted to technical sergeant in November 1944 after another action near Bastogne. He received a Bronze Star for the compass navigation mission, but the citation was vague. It mentioned initiative and leadership under difficult conditions. It didn't explain what actually happened, because the details were still classified. After the war, Thompson returned to Pennsylvania. He worked as a machinist at a tool and die shop in Pittsburgh, married, had 3 children. Never talked much about the war, except with other veterans who understood. The homemade compass stayed in a box in his garage, along with his medals and a few photographs. He died in 1993 at age 71. His children donated his war memorabilia to the Patton Museum at Fort Knox, Kentucky. The compass is there now. Display case number 47 in the navigation equipment section. A piece of cardboard with a mirror, a magnetized needle on a pencil eraser, and string. The placard next to it explains that Staff Sergeant James Thompson used this device to navigate 12 tanks through enemy territory when all standard compasses failed. It doesn't mention that the compass gave the wrong heading initially, doesn't mention that mechanical failure and dumb luck saved them from driving into a German encampment, doesn't mention that Thompson spent the rest of his life wondering if 60% confidence was good enough justification for risking 62 other lives. Modern military GPS systems make compass navigation nearly obsolete. Tank commanders can pinpoint their position within 10 meters anywhere on Earth. Magnetic anomalies don't matter when you're using satellites. But GPS can be jammed, can be disrupted, can fail. And when it does, soldiers still need to know which way is north. The Army still teaches basic compass navigation at Fort Benning. Recruits learn to use lensatic compasses, learn to adjust for magnetic declination, learn to navigate by terrain association and dead reckoning. They don't learn about Thompson's improvised compass, don't learn that sometimes the crude solution works when the sophisticated one fails. Don't learn that survival often depends less on having the right equipment than on having the creativity to improvise when everything goes wrong. Thompson's compass sits in its display case, a reminder that wars are won not just by superior technology or better training, but by ordinary soldiers making desperate decisions in impossible situations. And sometimes, getting lucky enough to live long enough to tell the story. 12 tanks, 63 men, 4 hours in enemy territory, 1 homemade compass, 0 casualties. That was the mission that no training manual could have prepared them for. If you found this story as compelling as we did, please take a moment to like this video. It helps us share more forgotten stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to stay connected with these untold histories. Each one matters. Each one deserves to be remembered. And we'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment below telling us where you're watching from. Our community spans from Texas to Tasmania, from veterans to history enthusiasts. You're part of something special here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for keeping these stories alive.